What we're trying to focus on is how do we make sure we get 4 more years where the American people, particularly kids like me, growing up in poverty, have the best future we could possibly have.
Senator Scott, thank you.
Of the American dream. That takes Donald Trump.
Today in stupid news, Senator Tim Scott, a South Carolina Republican, was brutally fact-checked by ABC News' This Week host Jonathan Karl on Sunday when he claimed that violent crime has seen the, quote, greatest increase under President Joe Biden's tenure. During this interview, which is riddled with misdirects and mistruths, including about Trump's ludicrous proposal to eliminate income tax by putting massive tariffs on imports, which we'll get to later, so stick around for that, Karl asked Senator Scott about his views on the Supreme Court's recent decision to strike down a Trump-era federal ban on bump stocks, which allows some guns to fire more rapidly. Because that's what we need in this country, right? The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a faster gun, because it's got a bump stock, which is now also easier for bad guys to get a hold of too. It makes perfect sense in moron land. And while Scott briefly shared his respect for the court's decision, he then pulled a classic Republicanism by quickly shifting the focus to the issue of violent crime, saying, quote, under Joe Biden, we've seen the greatest increase in violent crime in my lifetime. Now, even though I don't think I need to tell you how categorically false that is, I'm a firm believer in proving things, unlike those on the right. So I'll play this first clip from the interview and then we'll dissect it and disprove almost everything Tim Scott says in this ridiculous interview.
I want to start with the Supreme Court's decision on Friday. Good morning. The Supreme Court's decision on Friday overturning an order, an executive action by President Trump to ban bump stocks after they were used in what was and still remains the deadliest mass shooting in American history. Were you satisfied with that? Have any concerns about that decision?
You know, John, it's simply this. We trust and believe and respect the decision of the Supreme Court. What we need to focus on, John, is the violence that we're seeing across this nation. Under Joe Biden, we've seen the greatest increase in violent crime in my lifetime. And so focusing on ways for us to reduce that crime means getting 4 more years of Donald Trump. Under Donald Trump, we actually respected law enforcement.
Really? Under Donald Trump, you respected law enforcement. Well, that's rich. Try telling that to a Capitol Police officer.
Under Joe Biden, we've seen the movement to defund the police.
Defund the police. Right. Point of clarification. Are you referring to the progressive calls to curb the overspending on the militarization of our police forces, to combat them responding to every single situation with violence and brute force as if they're going to war? Well, I guess I shouldn't say every situation. They did take their time and approach cautiously when all those kids' lives were at stake. Or are you referring to this?
We should be asking the Department of Justice is, when are you going to stop this political persecution? And we should demand it. And the way to get that done is if they refuse to stop going after, pretrial January 6th defendants and persecuting them, if they won't stop going after parents trying to hold their school boards accountable, if they won't stop this ridiculous witch hunt on President Trump and his former administration and staff and supporters, then what has to happen is, in a Republican majority, we have to defund and make cuts in the Department of Justice.
Leaving communities like the one I grew up in devastated and ravaged by a wave of violent crime that we have not seen literally in 5 decades.
Actually, Senator, as you probably know, the latest stats on violent crime and on the murder rate, they're actually down this past year. But let me get back to my question.
God, there's nothing quite as gratifying as a good old fact check directly to a Republican senator's face. So good on him for bringing that up. Also, before we dive into that and disprove it even further, just look at this background that Tim Scott has with his books blatantly displayed behind him. The egotism of the Republican Party truly knows no bounds. And even though Scott continued to push those ludicrous claims throughout this interview, they couldn't be further from the truth. Because a study published by Poitner last month found that official data from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the same one Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to defund, although lagging, shows an overall decrease in violent crime during Biden's presidency. Leading to Biden saying at a Memorial Day service in his speech, it's no accident unemployment and violent crime is near a record 50-year low. And the analysis of the data confirmed the accuracy of that statement. The violent crime rate, which comprises homicide, robbery, and aggravated assault, peaked in 1991 and has been falling since, with a few upward blips, notably during the COVID-19 pandemic. And using two different 50-year time spans, the study found that the 2022 violent crime rate of just under 370 per 100,000 residents is indeed near the lowest levels in the past 5 decades. And the rate was only marginally lower in 2014 and 2019. So not only is he trying to completely misdirect by not answering the question here, he's doing it with utter outright BS lies that are provably false. Almost as stupid and false as the idea that Donald Trump could get rid of the income tax by increasing tariffs on imports, which they get into later in this interview.
I want to ask you about a few of the policies he spoke at in the meeting with the House Republicans and with the Senate Republicans. During the meeting with House Republicans, he declared that he, quote, loves tariffs. I'm just wondering, do you, I know you've been a free trader for as long as I've known you, do you love tariffs now?
Listen, one of the things that we have to do is recognize that we should focus on free trade, but free trade requires a fair competition. When you have China literally lying, cheating, and stealing our intellectual property, yes, tariffs create headwinds that actually levels the playing field. But more importantly, what we need is a president who understands how to fix our broken economy today. And Donald Trump led us to the strongest economy we've seen in the last 50 years.
So let me ask you about one of the specific policy ideas he floated while he was in Washington. He floated the idea of raising tariffs high enough to be able to eliminate all of the income that comes in from income taxes. Is that, I mean, by some calculations, that's a 70% across-the-board tax on everything imported in the country. Some other estimates, it's nearly 100%. Would you favor a policy like that? Replacing the income tax with a massive new tariffs on everything coming into the country?
Well, John, I wasn't in that House meeting. I was in the Senate meeting. But what I can tell you he spoke about during the time of the Senate is actually exempting taxation on tips.
Now, he just kind of gives some non-answer about Trump wanting to alleviate taxes on tips for workers. Clearly, the man is not an economics guy. But as a free trade guy, he should understand why Trump's idea is the dumbest thing in the world.
Okay, so Donald Trump has floated the idea of completely eliminating all income tax for every American. And believe it or not, this is actually possible, but here's why you wouldn't want it to happen. So in a private meeting with lawmakers, Trump apparently spoke about a plan called the all tariffs policy. The idea is if tariffs, which is like a tax on things America imports, were raised, the federal income tax could be completely eliminated. But here's the problem. On the surface, tariffs are technically paid by the importers, but they are almost always passed down to us, the consumer, through the prices. So, for example, if Walmart, the country's largest importer, was told you now have to pay 25% higher taxes on everything you bring in, well, when you go to the checkout, expect your shopping to cost at least 25% higher. If income tax was replaced by tariffs, pretty much all everyday necessities like clothing, food, electronics, vehicles, equipment would immediately raise in price. And while this would be a fantastic trade-off for those who have massive tax bills, people in the middle and low-income households especially, honestly, wouldn't be getting that great of a deal. Another major issue is how much Trump would have to increase tariffs by as well. To completely replace the current amount of money that the government gets from income tax, Trump would have to increase the average tariff rate by around 85%. And I don't even need to explain how much disruption that would cause. So while theoretically it's possible, Trump saving us all from taxes seems to be more of a political move than a realistic one.
Exactly. All of Trump's moves are political rather than realistic. Take the border wall, for example. So maybe it's time for Senator Tim Scott to pull his head out of Trump's rear end and see the world for what it is before their alternative facts destroy the country and the economy. But unfortunately, I doubt that'll happen anytime soon.
What we're trying to focus on is how do we make sure we get 4 more years where the American people, particularly kids like me, growing up in poverty, have the best future we could possibly have.
Senator Scott, thank you.
Version of the American dream. That takes Donald Trump.
Thanks for watching, folks. Make sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. For Really American, I'm Kenny Hesse, and I'll see you all in the next one.